A storm doesn't start with lightning. It starts with pressure building in the air, quiet, invisible, impossible to ignore. And that's exactly what happened when Attorney General Pam Bondi made a promise she couldn't walk back. A promise that would ignite one of the most controversial, confusing, and mistrusted episodes in modern political history. Because once you tell the country you're holding the full Epstein files, there's no undoing that. People expect answers. They expect truth. And when the truth doesn't come, suspicion fills the silence fast.
Sitting on my desk right now to review, end of quote. The White House then staged a major media release of Epstein-related files on February 27th, including preparing binders for conservative influencers and commentators. However, the files released were largely already publicly available. There was nothing new. After intense blowback, Attorney General Bondi went back to Fox News, the mothership, and claimed that a whistleblower, quote, assured her there were more files, and that, quote, New York, Southern District of New York, was sitting on thousands of pages of documents. And she promised on Fox, and I quote, we will get everything, and the country will see, quote, the full Epstein files. These are quotes from Attorney General Bondi voluntarily appearing on Fox News to explain the situation. For the next 4 months, the Department of Justice and the FBI were silent. What happened during that period? Well, we received information that Attorney General Bondi pressured the FBI to assign, now get this, approximately 1,000 agents in its Information Management Division and hundreds of additional agents from the New York field office to work 24-hour shifts to review and produce more documents on Epstein on an arbitrarily short deadline. These officials were told to, quote, flag any records in which President Trump was mentioned. But after this flurry of activity using tens of thousands of personnel hours in March, it took DOJ and FBI 3 additional months to produce no new documents, but rather an unsigned memorandum on July 7th finding that, quote, this systemic review revealed no incriminating client list. Naturally, after all of the public promises Attorney General Bondi has made, the public is really suspicious of her finding. This suspicion has been exacerbated by public reporting that FBI Director Patel and FBI Deputy Director Bongino disagree with Attorney General Bondi's handling of this matter. Public mistrust has been fed by other claims in the July 7th memorandum. This memorandum included links to surveillance video footage from outside Epstein's cell in the hours leading up to his death. The July 7th memorandum describes one of the videos released as full, raw footage, yet experts who've analyzed it concluded the video was likely modified. The Trump administration has essentially created a new controversy rather than solving one. President Trump is not helping matters at all. Despite his administration continuing making promises about the transparency on Jeffrey Epstein and claims about the existence of records that have not been produced, he is currently telling the country the president is saying this is all, quote, a scam, close quote. Yesterday, President Trump posted on his personal social media site, and I quote, my past supporters have bought into this BS hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson, and they probably never will. That's from the president's personal social media. This is the president talking about his own constituents who are concerned about claims his own campaign surrogates and administration have continually raised. President Trump and Attorney General Bondi are directly responsible for all this confusion and mistrust, and they need to be fully transparent, and they should release all of the documents for the public to review as quickly as possible.
From the moment Bondi sat under the bright studio lights, just 17 days into her new role, everything changed. She told millions of viewers that the Epstein client list was sitting on my desk right now. No hesitation, no qualifiers, just certainty delivered on national television. That one sentence set off a nationwide shockwave. Families, journalists, survivors, even lawmakers, everyone leaned forward, finally expecting clarity on a case that had been buried under secrets, sealed documents, and unexplained gaps for years. But what followed wasn't clarity. It was chaos, because while the country waited, the administration staged a massive media rollout. A flashy release of Epstein-related files packaged in binders, sent out to influencers, teased as a moment of truth. Yet when people opened the files, what they found wasn't groundbreaking. The documents were almost entirely things that had already been public for years. There was no new list, no fresh revelations, none of the answers the public had been promised. It didn't feel like transparency. It felt like theater, and pressure started boiling. The backlash was immediate, and the skepticism was loud. So Bondi went back to the same network, insisting that a whistleblower had assured her more files existed. Thousands of pages, she said, all sitting in the Southern District of New York. She vowed again to deliver the full Epstein files. It was another promise, stacked on top of the first one she hadn't kept. Then everything went silent. For months, no updates. No documents. No timeline. Just an information vacuum stretching across spring and into early summer. And that vacuum filled with mistrust. Rumors started flying. Analysts started asking tough questions. Former officials called it strange and irregular. But inside the federal agencies, something far more intense was happening. Something the public wouldn't hear about until later. Reports began to surface that Bondi had pressured the FBI to go into overdrive. Not a small task force, not a special unit, but roughly 1,000 agents in the FBI's Information Management Division, plus hundreds more from the New York field office. Agents were told to work 24-hour shifts, flagged under orders to hunt down every file that even mentioned the Epstein case. Even more specifically, any file that included references to the president. It was an unprecedented mobilization, massive manpower, extreme deadlines, and a narrow focus. Some inside the Bureau reportedly questioned the urgency. Others questioned the motive. But the orders were followed. And after all of that, after thousands of hours and hundreds of people working around the clock, nothing new was released. Not a single new document. Instead, 3 months later, the Department of Justice published an unsigned memorandum, a document with no author's name on it, claiming that after a systemic review, no incriminating client list had been found. It wasn't the full file. It wasn't the massive cash Bondi promised. It wasn't even clear who wrote the memo. And to the public, it wasn't believable. The reaction was immediate. Distrust. People remembered her words. They remembered the promise. They remembered the media rollout. And now they wanted to know, what happened to the files she said were sitting on her desk? What happened to the thousands of pages she said were hidden in New York? Where did everything disappear to? But that wasn't the only problem. Inside the government itself, cracks began to show. Reporting emerged that 2 of the most senior FBI officials, Director Patel and Deputy Director Bonino, quietly disagreed with Bondi's handling of the case. That disagreement leaked into the public sphere, feeding the perception that something was off. When top officials don't share the same story, it usually means the real story hasn't been told. And then came the moment that turned suspicion into outright alarm. Because included inside the July 7th memorandum was something no one expected. Links to surveillance footage from outside Epstein's cell in the hours leading up to his death. The memo described the footage as full raw video, complete and untouched. That's what the memo claimed. But video experts who analyzed the footage said something different. They said it looked altered. They said it appeared modified. They said the footage didn't move like genuine raw surveillance video should if the documents weren't new, if the memo wasn't signed, and if the footage wasn't authentic. What exactly had been happening during those months of silence? Instead of clearing the air, the release created an entirely new controversy. A controversy layered on top of the original controversy that still hadn't been resolved. The public wasn't just confused. They felt like they were being toyed with. Mistrust turned into frustration. Frustration turned into anger. And then another twist dropped. The president publicly dismissed concerns about the case as a scam. Not just critics, his own supporters. The same citizens who were told transparency was coming. The same people who were promised a complete release. Now they were being told they were gullible for expecting answers. It was contradiction layered on contradiction. This wasn't just poor communication. It wasn't just bad timing. It was a pattern, one where public expectations were raised, delayed, manipulated, and ultimately dismissed. And this is where Senator Durbin stepped in. During the hearing, Durbin didn't rely on accusations. He didn't need emotional arguments or political attacks. He simply read Bondi's own quotes back to her, her own timeline, her own statements, her own promises, one after another. Each one contrasted with the reality the public had been living with. It was devastating in its simplicity. He showed the gap between what she said and what she delivered, the gap between what the public expected and what actually happened, the gap between transparency promised and transparency withheld. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a breach of trust. Durbin's method was powerful because he didn't interpret her statements. He played them back like evidence. It forced everyone watching to confront the reality that the inconsistencies weren't rumors. They weren't speculation. They were documented, recorded, and repeated by Bondi herself. And the Epstein case, the one already drenched in secrecy, tragedy, and unanswered questions, was now tangled in new layers of confusion created by the very officials who vowed to untangle it. You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to see the pattern. You don't need to assume anything extraordinary to recognize the inconsistencies. All you have to do is follow the promises and compare them to the outcome. Bondi promised the full Epstein files. She promised thousands of pages. She promised transparency. But she delivered silence, an unsigned memo, disputed footage, and internal disagreement at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. And whether those decisions were mistakes, mismanagement, or something far more deliberate, the result is the same. The public lost trust. And when trust breaks inside institutions meant to protect justice, it doesn't just fracture, it collapses. Slowly at first, then all at once. Because the Epstein case isn't just another political fight. It represents something deeper. A question of whether powerful people can bend the truth, delay accountability, and manipulate public expectation without consequences. If the full files existed, where are they? If they didn't exist, why were they promised multiple times? If the footage was raw, why did specialists say otherwise? If internal leaders disagreed, what was happening behind closed doors? These aren't small questions. They're the kind that shake confidence in entire systems. This is why oversight matters. Why hearings matter. Why skeptics tracking timelines and monitoring promises matter. Because when institutions fail, the public must not. And if all of this unfolded under the bright lights of national media, imagine what happens in cases that never make it into the spotlight. If you care about truth, accountability, and transparency, share this video, hit the like button, and subscribe. More eyes mean more pressure. More pressure means fewer secrets. And fewer secrets mean a system that finally starts working for the people again.